Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friend, Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I hope that you're doing well.
It's a good day so far.
Good day so far, and I can tell you where it's not a good day right now, at least in my estimation, depending on how you view the world. I don't think it's a very good day in Kabul.
Well, I think unless you're the Taliban, I think it's pretty much a bad day for everybody, what's going on, and really all of Afghanistan.
Well, as you know, this past weekend I was batching it, being a bachelor, as my children are out of the house in college and elsewhere. My wife is visiting our daughter over in South Carolina, and I wanted to be productive on Sunday. I really did. I was relatively productive on Saturday. I wanted to be productive on Sunday, but I found myself just absolutely watching the news. I was fascinated, morbidly fascinating, I guess you could say, watching the scenes that were coming out of Kabul, and I was just dumbstruck by not just this, what I was witnessing, but just how quickly it all seemed to fall apart. I mean, just with breathtaking speed. And what frustrated me the most is probably, it's not that the Taliban eventually took over Kabul. I mean, I think a lot of people would have understood that, but how quickly. Certainly, we, the United States and other, Western powers, I guess if you want to call them powers, must have been operating with some very bad information.
Well, that was part of what at least was so shocking to me was just how quickly things changed. I mean, it was a week ago or so that Biden came out and said it's not going to be anything like Saigon. We're not going to have helicopters pulling people out, and guess what? That's essentially what we've had. And that's what's been confusing to me was the disconnect between some of the reports coming out of the Defense Department and then what the president was reiterating, because there was a big division between those two. People in the Defense Department were saying that it was some of the most grim reports that they had put out, and then Biden comes out and says, they're not going to take over. The Taliban's not going to take over. It'll be 3 months before they take over Kandahar. It'll be 5 months before anything else happens. And it was less than 3 days. And then you're seeing just mass chaos essentially across all of Afghanistan.
Well, you're absolutely right there. And Sam, I am of an age, I remember actually when Saigon fell. It was 1975. I was soon to be 7, but I was 6, I guess, when it fell. And, I would say that there are some parallels. I'd say where there aren't parallels is the fact that the South Vietnamese, as corrupt as they were and as toothless as the ARVN was by the end of it, still, I think, put up some measure of fight. Some measure of fight. Not a lot, but obviously because the Viet Cong ended up winning, or the North Vietnamese ended up winning, but there still seemed to be a little bit of fight left in people. And then, even with the government itself, there seemed to be some measure of trying to hold things together, and they just were incapable of doing so. And then, obviously, the lack of an evacuation plan, helicopters on top of the roof of the embassy. It was a U.S. nightmare. Just absolute nightmare. And I do think that there is an apt comparison about just how much of a nightmare this was. The hasty withdrawal. And this is where I kind of want to get to. Are there generational differences about the withdrawal from Afghanistan and how we view what has happened over the last several days in terms of the Taliban taking over Afghanistan? And I've got to tell you, in terms of Gen X, and having a son who is, soon to be 20 and could potentially be drafted if there ever was a draft again, the thought of my son going over to Afghanistan and fighting for what is now, or what was by the end of it, kind of a foggy sort of mission, or not really understanding exactly what was happening, gives me great pain. So I don't fault necessarily this administration or even the previous one for wanting to get out of Afghanistan. How do you view it as being a Gen Z?
Well, I think that's kind of what I've picked up on from most people is that, most people are looking at what's going on and saying, this can't be the best way to have done this. However, most of those people aren't advocating for staying there and fighting in Afghanistan for another 2 decades. It's just this reality that sometimes there's not a good outcome to some situations. And even with that said, I don't think this was the best outcome. I think there's better ways to go about it. We announcing that we're leaving, pulling people out, and then burning sensitive documents is essentially the timeline. It probably should have been in the reverse. You burn what you don't want to take out, you get the important people out, and then you say, hey, by the way, we're out of here. Instead, it's just been a complete collapse. that seems somewhat avoidable.
So I guess we're not sharing. I guess we're not trading perspectives terribly much at all, because I've got no problem with having a very minimal mission there, or even no mission there. However, it really does seem, rightly or wrongly, that it was all done kind of hastily. I believe we left that Air Force base in the dead of night, and even as it became apparent, really, I mean, the week prior, that the Taliban was going to sweep into Kabul, that there didn't seem to be really much of an evacuation plan, or it all seemed to kind of happen very, very last minute. And that to me, as an American, is more frustrating than anything else. We can point fingers at anyone. There's enough finger pointing, although going back to George Bush, the Obama administration, Trump, all of them, regardless of political party. At the end of the day, how we got out of there, and the fact that we didn't seem to have a very good plan to get people out of there, really, in my estimation, as Gen X, is embarrassing for our military, and then also for our State Department, but not necessarily for the American public as a whole, but for our State Department and our military to have such little strategy, in my estimation, and then such bad intelligence. That's embarrassing.
And it's almost just a little heartbreaking too. You look at the amount of lives lost, Americans, even the Afghan National Army people. I think they lost over 60,000. There's over 2,000 American deaths. Officially, we spent over $800 billion there, training people, giving them weapons, and then now we're seeing, Ford Ranger pickup trucks squatting so low because they have all the Taliban's U.S. military weapons in the back of them, and to see how much effort and sacrifice that we put in for 20 years, to see it essentially now all for nothing. That was always kind of the issue. What are we getting out of this? How are we fixing things? There wasn't a lot of movement or progress there, but to see it just completely collapse overnight, just about, is heartbreaking. And I think it's especially heartbreaking to people that in one sense or another have sacrificed in that country.
All right. It seems as though there aren't very many generational differences, and although you and I tend to agree, I would imagine most people feel the same way. Even regardless of how far left you are or how far right you are, I think most Americans kind of wanted to get out of Afghanistan.
Well,
so I don't think very few people would truly fault this administration for doing so. However, I think even those on the far extremes would have to agree that this was not the best way of going about it.
It does seem like one of the issues that has been kind of bipartisan, and that most people want to end the conflict in Afghanistan. The disagreement is around how we do it and what that looks like. But the past two administrations, that's been a selling point of them, is that they're going to pull Americans out of Afghanistan. And this has been one of the more divisive election periods that we've had, and the two major candidates agreed on essentially pulling people out of Afghanistan.
Well, and it's interesting to note, and I've read some commentary on this, is why is Afghanistan so unpopular? Particularly when you consider the number of bases we have around the world. Why wouldn't we maintain that Air Force base in Afghanistan? And I think it's due to the fact that Afghanistan obviously has been the longest war that we've been in. Even though I don't believe we've lost a life there in the last 12 to 18 months or something like that.
I think it's been around 12 months.
And I'm not trying to be cavalier about lives lost, but it's not been the bloodiest war that we've had. And we could have maintained a small presence there and helped with airstrikes and just give the Afghan security forces some measure of backbone. However, Afghanistan is so amazingly unpopular, and I think the reason for it is because no one knows what we were doing over there.
And that's it. I mean, you ask younger people what we're doing over there, and it's like, don't really get a clear answer. And part of that's probably due to the lack of progress we've made over the past 20 years there. I mean, even there's questions of the opium fields, what you do over there. Do you burn them and have the farmers go join the Taliban? Or do you give them fertilizer to grow weed, and then often that's used for IUDs or IEDs? But nonetheless, I mean, it's just confusing, and it's hard to come up with a clear answer of what we're doing.
Yeah. So shifting away from the politics aspect of Afghanistan, the debacle here, do you think that this will have any form of economic ramifications around the world? And then what do you think it could mean for strategical alliances? And this is where we might have some generational differences.
Well, I think some other countries are going to have to really look at what America's doing over there. And, countries that have often relied on the support of the U.S. military and the strength of it are going to have to really kind of take a look and say, can we fully rely on America here? I was for the most part for getting most Americans out of Afghanistan, but some of the people there, the translators, some of the military that was working with the United States, to see everyone up and leave essentially in a couple days. If you're another country that really is only supported by the U.S. military, that's got to be a little concerning to you. And I think that's where other countries are going to have to look at their alliances that they have again.
Well, and I think it's primarily for those people that are maybe lesser allies, if you will, people that aren't necessarily are tried and true. I think you're absolutely right on that, particularly some third world countries going, can we trust what the United States has to say? Now, economically speaking, this probably is a relative non-event. Afghanistan, we have very little trade with them, and whatever trade we have is generally it's minimal. It's a very poor country. There's not a lot of anything going on there, economic activity. With the Taliban in there, they're going to keep at least 50% of their workforce, a potential workforce, out of the workforce. So this is a poor country that will have a very small per capita income, very low levels of HDI, human development, and so in terms of just overall global economy, Afghanistan is a backwater and will continue to be a backwater. I think where it would or could have any sort of economic impact on the world is if they again allow groups like Al-Qaeda and obviously Islamic State and others to build bases there, train there, and we don't have a response for it.
Another area where I think we're going to see in the future is all of this has made me think of Taiwan and what's going to happen with Taiwan. And, if China starts to push into Taiwan more and more so, what are we going to do there?
Well, and I've read various articles from global media outlets, news outlets, that have questioned the same thing. Whether or not Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping is sitting there watching this going, God, this is sloppy stuff. American military just really kind of caved like a tent, or the American-backed government caved like a tent, and listening to the president kind of wash his hands of the whole mess really yesterday when he came back from Camp David. I mean, he's now back at Camp David. Wash his hands of the mess. It really does. If I were the Chinese and the Russians, I think I'd really question whether or not the United States currently has the mettle or the backbone to uphold its end of the deal in terms of a lot of regional defense pacts.
Well, I think it shows that it doesn't. I think in the current state, it's a matter of time before Taiwan is essentially part of China.
Well, I think the situation with the Taiwanese might be a little bit different than the one of Afghanistan. Currently, you would probably find more Americans willing to defend Taiwan than Afghanistan. However, I truly do believe that emboldens the Chinese and the Russians as a pretty good selling point. Even if it's not necessarily the case, so much of business and politics is based on optics. And when the Chinese are doing their Belt and Road Initiative around the world, and you're going to a non-aligned country, they can sit there and say, I don't know what you want with the Americans. They're giving you vaccines, we're giving you roads, and by the way, you can't trust what they have to say. And so that's a huge problem, I think, in my estimation. And that's even if we don't like Afghanistan, even if we want to get out of there, it's how you go about doing things and how you keep your word. And that's not any different in politics than it is in your personal life. And that's where I think, all of our administrations have failed here, and the military's failed here. And I think this administration did a very, very poor job with this. And truthfully, I wish that we had been trading perspectives on this a little bit more, but I don't see there's going to be any generational difference on this.
No, and it makes me think American citizens typically don't have a strong appetite for long conflicts to continue to go on. And I think that's part of what we've seen in Afghanistan. I mean, there's nothing to compare it to, a war that we've been sending Americans over for 20 years. And I think that's some other countries are a little more comfortable with long-term conflicts. And I think that's kind of what we're going to see going forward. Countries like China who talk in, dynasties and decades and centuries versus 4-year cycles, being a little more comfortable with long-standing conflict.
Well, and hopefully, hopefully, maybe we'll learn a lesson with this. It seems as though every time we try to prop up a government in some form or fashion, the government becomes corrupt and weak. Because maybe we just shower them with too much money. And I think there are plenty of anecdotes out there about how we tried to pay off local tribesmen in Afghanistan. I've got family members who served over there who told me that the amount of just money that was being thrown around was just kind of absurd. And of course, that type of thing will lead to corruption. And I think we saw that with the misinformation about the size of the Afghan government. It was us throwing so much money at it that it was in everyone's best interest in Afghanistan to lie about the number of troops that they actually had.
Yep.
And that way the money kept on flowing.
Right. They said it was 3-1, but when you really look at how many soldiers were over there, it was not 3-1.
It's not 3-1. And we saw the corruption with the South Vietnamese government. We saw the corruption with Chiang Kai-shek's government during the Chinese Civil War. Korea was, was a massive victory, at least in that regard. A little bit different story, but even so, in Iraq and all these other places where we get involved, we come in and shower people with money and expecting them to, make their determinations about their economy and their government based on the amount of money that we throw at the problem, as opposed to going in there and actually, with the building blocks that we need to have.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we'll have generational differences on that. And unfortunately, this happened. And again, I'm still morbidly fascinated by it. I'll probably read a lot more articles about this, find out exactly what's going on. The Taliban is out there saying that, hey, we're Taliban 2.0. They might not be saying this, but they're saying, we're so much nicer than we used to be. And maybe they are. And one can only keep their fingers crossed. However, it's kind of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And they have a reputation for being a ignorant, backwards group of people, and until they prove me otherwise, I'm afraid that's how I'm going to assess the situation.
And I think you're fair to continue to assume that.
Okay, well, Sam, no trading perspectives, but at least in terms of just really Afghanistan, don't believe that there will be any sort of massive global economic shakeout from this. There will be some policy realignments, but they won't be anything significant immediately. However, it will probably cause some non-aligned countries to question the word of the United States, not necessarily on our will to get out of Afghanistan, but how we got out of Afghanistan. So I don't blame the Biden administration. I don't think anyone does for wanting to get out of this 20-year conflict that didn't seem to have an end in sight. No matter what we were doing, we seemed to be doing the wrong thing. So I get it. However, taking a look on the TV on Sunday and since then and reading the articles, it just makes me wish that we had done a better job with it.
Absolutely.
And so economically, again, no big deal. However, sometimes there's more to life than just simple economics, and I can't believe I'm saying that.
Yep, I agree.
All right, guys, thank you all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions or comments, by all means, please let us know. You can always drop us a line at Trading Perspectives. Go to oakworth.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you want to read more or hear more of what we've got to say or how we think, please go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of weighty and insightful information and fun things to read. All right, Sam, I'm going to give you another chance to say something just outlandishly insightful.
That's all I got today.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.